when you found out about Ralph?
You want the whole story?
Yeah.
Okay. I was on call that weekend, right? I was making rounds. I got a call that Ralph was very nauseous, could not get up, was very dizzy. He had gone to an urgent care center, and they told him that he may have some inner ear infection and anti-vertigo medication. He should drink fluids and rest and see how he went, and if he didn't feel any better, to come back. Megan told me he got home and he was violently nauseous and he was not getting any better. So I said, well, if this is not any better, I think he needs to come back, but bring him to the emergency room. I'm on call at South Miami Hospital. I'll make arrangements. Ralph was perfect in many ways and imperfect in many ways. And one of his imperfections was he was as stubborn as anything can be. Megan called me and said that Ralph had declined to go. So I said, okay. I rushed down to the emergency room. I grabbed an IV bag, some lines, and I went to his house. I plugged him into an IV and he was there. I took his blood pressure. I plugged him into an IV and I said, look, I'm gonna let this run in, a liter of fluids, but if you're not any better, you're coming to the hospital. So I had to go because I got called to an emergency. So I went back to the hospital, and about an hour later, Megan called me and said, no, he's worse. I said, okay, bring him in. By that time, it was towards the beginning of the evening. We brought him in, and actually, he had to be carried from the car in because he could barely walk because of the dizziness. So I came down to the emergency room. I called a good friend of mine, the neurologist, and initial examination, he felt that he may have benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, BPPV, but that he was going to get a CAT scan and he was going to get an appropriate evaluation just to be on the safe side. I never forget the ER physician, who was very, very kind. Dr. Leanne Fernandez came and said, Dr. Garcia, we just finished the CAT scan, and she was very quiet. She didn't say much, and I said, well, here, let me show you. And she showed me the CAT scan, and there was this little haziness in the cerebellum. Says, well, the neurologist would like to get an MRI. I said, sure, why not? I remember during the CAT scan, I went inside the CAT scan suite in the control room just to see how he was doing, and he was laying perfectly still, no problems. So I said, let's go get the MRI. When the MRI came back, it was very obvious it was a tumor there. And it was told to me by the neurologist. I had not told anybody. I had not told Ralph. I had not told Megan at that point. And I spoke to the neurologist. I remember walking the long hallway to his room, and essentially by that time the neurologist met me there, and we talked to Ralph. Megan obviously found out slightly later. I remember driving back. I had sent Pat, my wife, and the brothers home, and I got home, and I never forget that walk from my car to the house, and I said, Pat, our son has a cancer, all likelihood in the brain, and those were the hardest words I've ever had to say. And I washed up a little bit, and meanwhile I was still on call, but luckily no other calls had come in, and I went back to the hospital, and then we met Megan in the bridge at South Miami Hospital between the towers, and her first words to us were, besides the tears, were, this isn't fair. And sure, to us at that time it really didn't seem fair. And we walked in, and we were there with Ralph, not saying much. Then a lot of people came, and they were with Ralph and everything. And I remember that day was just dragging. It was a very dragging Sunday. I remember we went down to Mass at 12, and the chaplain said a prayer for Ralph and everything. And I just didn't know what to feel. I was so numb. And the neurosurgeon was coming by later, and apparently came by when I was in there, and said, well, we'll operate, this was a Sunday, we'll operate on a Wednesday, and then you may be able to go home on a Friday. And that just didn't sit well with me. So by this time it was the evening, and I went home by myself. I left Pat and the brothers with Ralph and all the family members, and I sat in my recliner, and I just thought to myself, what would I do if it was a cardiovascular case? And I said, I review the objective data and see what my options are. And that's what I did. I started thinking about it as if it was a heart case. And I started making some phone calls. And before I made the second phone call, the first phone call I made to a good friend whose husband worked at the University of Miami. And but before I made the second phone call, I had 2 phone calls came in and said, Ralph needs to be evaluated at the university. And it got momentum going. So I, at that point, Nick, who happens to be Mason's godfather, our third oldest, called, and I explained he's an orthodontist nowadays. He was in the process of, he's also in the process of studying dentistry. He was at that time he was about to begin his residency in orthodontics, and I said, Nick, this is a story. So in typical Nick fashion, he researches everything, and he said, Dad, this is where we need to go to the university. We couldn't travel to Duke University because Megan was 7.5 months pregnant. Mm-hmm. and that was unfortunately the problem, that Megan couldn't travel. So it turns out that Dr. Rick Komatar, who came from also Sloan Kettering, but was also a Duke University graduate, was very familiar with a lot of the protocols. So he was, through the courtesy of my brother-in-law, who was at that time the SICU nursing supervisor, and knew Dr. Komatar. Dr. Komatar welcomed us with open arms, and he said, I can help you take care of Ralph. And so we transferred him. Remember, Ralph was smiling because his firefighter brothers had brought him a mermaid balloon. So, and that's how we went to the university. At the university, Dr. Komatar sat with us and said, look, it looks like it may be a mass, but this is very strange the way it's presenting, especially given his age and where it was. Said there's still a possibility, could this be some type of infective mass or something, him diving into the water and grabbing something, I even thought, it was kind of strange for a parasite called Naegleria, because usually that's more frontal lobe, but I said, well, anything's possible. So after much deliberation, the neurosurgical team decided to do a lumbar spinal tap on Ralph. And while the initial reports were negative, in the next 24 to 36 hours, he developed an unrelenting headache back and forth, and they thought that it was due to the tap. So they went ahead and did they set him up for a blood patch, a patch to seal where there may be a CSF leak that gives part of the headache syndrome. Well, Ralph unfortunately ate a banana on the day he was supposed to have his patch. That was on a Saturday, actually Friday. So they were going to try to postpone it. And then between Saturday, his headache started intensifying. And then Megan called me between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday that his headache was the worst it had ever been. So I called Dr. Komatar and he said, we'll do the patch now. And I went into the hospital. I told Pat, my wife, to come in later. And when I went there, I remember Megan and Ralph were getting ready to be put on the stretcher. Ralph had his head covered because the lights were bothering him. So I grabbed his hand and went down with him. And at the very end, I said, I love you, son. And I said, I love you, Dad. And those were the last words I spoke with him. He went in to do the patch procedure. When they sat him up in the procedural table to do the patch, the anesthesiologist was ready to do it. He went out, and that was it. He bled into the brain, and that was the end. They took him to emergency surgery, and there were a lot of quote mitoses, which are evidence that a lot of cancer cells, and it was a glioblastoma grade 4 which gives him about 6 months to a year of expectant life. And Dr. Cometra came up to me and said, look, if this is where he bled, if I don't see any resolution in this area, this conversation of rehab and talking to him and what to expect is going to be moot, because that means he won't have a recovery. And I remember those words very clearly. And then as I was coming out, I had not told Megan at that point. Megan came in and said, I want to know everything. And so Rick and I sat with her and we went through the whole process. And then we waited. And the next morning we came in real early, and Megan told us, well, he has no reflexes. And I said, well, but is he going to be, weaned off sedatives? And it says, well, he's been off any medications for more than 12 hours. And so we wanted to see if perhaps the most dramatic conversations that took place about organ donation, because Ralph was an organ donor, and I wanted to see if he could donate his heart, but the neurologist found a slight reflex, and he said he would have to wait another 5 days or 7 days before he could make a decision. And as a family, and Megan and us, that would have been just too much. Plus, from a medical standpoint, I was concerned about the risk of infection on the other organs that he could donate. So we made a decision that he donate his kidneys and his liver, and we call it at that point. And so they took him to the OR, and in the OR they harvested the organs and declared him dead about 6:48 in the evening.
Where were you?
We were all together as a family in a very quiet room in one of the top floors at the University of Miami hospital, and we were gathered together and we just embraced. Rick Cometra came up and he was crying. It was a very, very powerful scene, and that was it. And it was just, I had a friend of mine, a vascular surgeon, who offered to go down and be my representative during the time. I wanted to go, but they didn't let me go to the OR where he was. So they didn't allow family members. So that was it.
How often do you think about Ralph?
Are you kidding me? Every day. Every single minute that I can. There's so many things that remind us of him. One of the hardest things Pat, my wife, had to do was go through his things at home. From finding we'd never gone back to his room after we found that letter from Harvard, stuck in a drawer that he never told us about, and I had to confront him with it. But all the stuff we have I call Freddie because we have a brand new a fire jacket, overcoat that he never used. Giving away his T-shirts. All his cousins wanted his T-shirts because they want to wear something that Ralph had. We all wanted a piece of Ralph, and that's that's what we've done. He's everywhere, and it's interesting you mentioned that. There's going to be a mass on the 24th that Father Valley, who married Ralph, because my brother is a Jesuit, he also celebrated the mass, but he's going to be out of town. And one of the things that at the homily of Ralph's funeral mass was, it was during Easter, and the famous stone at Jesus' tomb, and that Ralph's death was like that big stone that we had to roll away sometime, but we haven't. And we went to see The Shape of Water yesterday with Nick. We had not seen it, and this poem at the end really struck me. This very little paragraph that they attributed to either Saint Simeon or to Rumi, an Islamic writer. Said, "Unable to perceive the shape of you, I find you all around me. Your presence fills my eyes with your love. It humbles my heart,
for you are everywhere. And I think that Ralph is everywhere. I really do. And I think that if I could just embrace a firefighter, be it him or her, and say, look, take care of yourself. Whichever way you want to take care of yourself, make sure it's a safe way. Not because even if you don't want it, people around you love you and they want you to take care of yourself. And that's, to me, the most important thing about cancer. I mean, I heard so many stories about all these instructors that were, tough guys, and at the time I didn't hear about any tough gals, but mainly tough guys, and they did things to show their toughness. Sometimes we have to take a step back, and perhaps the biggest strength of a person is how he or she can humble themselves to accept the fact that there is a higher power outside of them that says you have to perhaps think not for yourself but of yourself. The higher power, whatever spirituality a person can be, doesn't have to be a spirituality thing. It has to be the fact that you humble yourself to say, I need help and I can do better. And whether it be a retiree or an instructor or a chief or a captain or a new boot coming out or an academy recruit, every one of us has to face the reality that we're not as strong as we think we are, and we need help. And the help that the firefighters can get is a very unique help, because they can initiate that help themselves. It's not like it's a mystery. It's not like, and that, by the way, just like I'm saying this with this emotion, I can apply it for PTSD, for heart and lung. I mean, the way we have to protect the firefighter is to educate the need for that, but also fulfill the need. You can talk about the need, you can talk about the events, you can talk about anything. Every time there's a loss in the fire service, everybody gets rattled. But then it dies down after 2 or 3 weeks. It needs to go beyond that. It needs to be with us all the time. The Venn diagrams that I put in my presentations in the past were all separate, and then I put them together because Ralph had this vision that everybody protect themselves. And the bottom line is, he was the one. He should have been a Navy SEAL. He could have been a Green Beret, Special Forces, because he never left anybody behind. As a leader, he always looked out for everybody. And if he was here today as a true leader, he would say, I will not stop until I make sure everybody in my team is safe. Well, in this particular case, the team happens to be the entire Fire Corps. So why can't the Fire Corps be safe? Well, the Fire Corps can be very safe. The fire service can be very safe. There are intrinsic risks that cannot be controlled, but there are other risks that can be controlled or at least ameliorated. And one of them is prevention of cancer, prevention of heart disease, prevention of lung disease, prevention of PTSD, and not prevention, but treatment of PTSD suffered through this. I would love to walk side by side Mr. Alvarez and give him a hug and say, we're not alone in this fight. We're together in this fight. Whether it be psychological, whether it be malignant cancer, whether it be cardiovascular disease or lung disease, we're together in this, and we can do this. Just a matter of executing it correctly with resources, education, and re-education, continuing education, and using the resources that we have. We can't be more thankful to a program like the University of Miami Sylvester Center. This is not an advertisement for them. This is a reality check that we have people on our side that want to help us. Let's do it. Let's use that help. Whether it be University of Florida, I'm a hurricane I'll accept the Gators coming in and helping us. I'll accept the Seminoles. I'll accept University of South Florida coming in. I'll accept the Golden Knights from UCF. Whoever wants to help. It's a concerted effort. Let me not forget Golden Panthers and Florida Atlantic University. If I miss anybody, I'm sorry. But the bottom line is, it can come from anywhere in the academic field, but it has to be executed in the working field. The academic field can provide you the information. The working field has to execute that. And that's all I'm asking. If you ask me what my whole journey has been. That's it.
Man, this is great.